Welcome to this week's Bible study, which is on the hard sayings of Jesus. Now, in the Gospels, Jesus says all sorts of things that are really quite difficult, perhaps particularly for the modern mind, and it's so easy to just skirt over them or try and explain them away in some way or other without really understanding what Jesus is talking about. Now, that's not just true for us, it was true when he uttered some of these sayings. For example, in John's Gospel, we have quite a long discourse where he says, unless you eat the body of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you cannot enter the kingdom. And after that, many of those who had followed him say, this is a hard saying. Who can listen to it? What we need to understand about Jesus' sayings is that they are very much in the tradition of the rabbis of his day and those that went before him. And the rabbis and Jesus use hyperbole quite a lot in order to put across a point. Now, using hyperbole means that you exaggerate what you want to say to the point of absurdity often in order to get the meaning across, but you need to think out what it is. For example, we started by the saying about eating and drinking his body and blood. Well, to see that as a literal statement is really rather silly, because that would mean that we're supposed to be cannibals. And clearly that's not what he meant. He meant something far deeper and more spiritual than a physical reality. Now, another example of the use of hyperbole might be in a saying such as, if you have faith as small as a grain of mustard seed, and you say to this mountain, be cast into the midst of the sea, it will obey you. Now, as far as I know, neither Jesus nor anybody else through faith has cast a mountain into the sea. But that's an absurdity, but it makes a point. I find it useful to think about a saying like that in the way that Carl Jung did. Now, Jung, when people came to him, he said, well, it's almost as if they are coming saying that they need to climb an unclimbable mountain. But after the therapy was successfully ended, they discovered that in fact what they were dealing with wasn't an unclimbable mountain, but was a hill that could be climbed. Now, the problem hadn't gone away, it had just taken on a proportion which made it possible for the person to move on. So, we're going to look at 7 hard sayings of Jesus. Now, the first saying is this. It's something that Jesus said to an enthusiastic young man who wanted to become a disciple. Let the dead bury their dead. We find that both in Matthew's Gospel and Luke's Gospel. The second hard saying is this. Whoever divorces and marries another commits adultery. And we find that in Matthew, Mark and Luke. The third difficult saying, that you must hate your parents, stroke spouse, stroke siblings, stroke children, if you want to become a member of the kingdom of God. We find that in Matthew and Luke. Number 4 comes from the Sermon on the Mount in St Matthew. You must be perfect. The 5th difficult saying, fear him who has power to cast into hell. We find that in Matthew and Luke. The penultimate saying that we're going to have a look at, sell what you have and come and follow me. That's in Matthew, Mark and Luke. And the final saying, let him who has no sword buy one. That's found only in Luke. Now, of course, there are many other sayings of Jesus that we might find rather problematic. But I'm going to suggest that we come at this with an eye to the fact that Jesus uses hyperbole quite a lot. And on Tuesday, when we meet, we'll look at each of those, or the ones that you want to look at particularly, with that in mind. And I think that might be quite helpful, because it means we will come to terms with what Jesus is really trying to say, rather than kind of pushing these sayings out of sight, where we don't really have to look at them or take them seriously.